Hello, I'm Lucy Beadnell with the Arc of Northern Virginia, and today we're going to be talking about legal authority options with a heavy focus on supported decision making and understanding the basics of that tool, but I'll also talk about how it intersects with other legal authority options. So without further ado, we'll go ahead here and get going. We're going to talk about why it's important to look at legal authority and the range of choices out there, and then dive more heavily into the basics of one of those tools, supported decision making. After we talk about understanding the concept of supported decision making and how it may work, we'll walk through some of the sticky questions that we tend to get or think about as we're exploring this option, and then give some real basics and functional tips on how to get going with supported decision making. And then I'm happy to take questions as we share resources as well at the end there. So here we go. To state the obvious, but I think sometimes it does need to be stated, at age 18, everyone in the United States becomes a legal adult, whether or not that person has a disability. I don't frankly know very many 18-year-olds of any ability who I feel like are ready to jump into the wide world and make heavy level adult decisions because they've got a great understanding of all the possible implications and all of the needs and issues and things that should go into that. So I just say that to say sometimes folks say, shouldn't my child automatically get help with decision making? Nope. That's going to be how you figure that out. And I would say this is also an important discussion to have with every burgeoning 18-year-old that you're going to meet along the way. We recognize that a lot of people with developmental disabilities may always need some help and more help than typically developing peers. But I would say this is a spectrum, right? All of us are going to need some help, especially around age 18. And how that looks over the long term is going to vary by person. When I say legal authority, I use that term to mean giving legal power, control to do things either with you or for you to someone else. They've got the authority to act with you or on your behalf as needed. So there's a big range of choices, and I divide them because this is sort of how Virginia law looks at it into two camps, making decisions about just about everything and money. So those are the two ways that Virginia looks at legal authority if I were to put them in two big buckets. In terms of options for how to help someone understand and make just any kind of regular life decision, we often first talk about supported decision making, which is exactly what it sounds like, using a big range of tools to help someone understand and make their choices. We're giving them support to get it done. That may be a little support or it may be a lot. It could vary by the situation or the needs of the person over time, but we're just helping. We're helping someone along. Another option that has the force of law is called a power of attorney. This is something that we see folks use often. I have a power of attorney for my husband, for example, that says if he's no longer able to make decisions, let's say he was in a bad accident, had an injury, something like that, that I'm the person who steps up and make those decisions. You can also have a document like that that doesn't kick into effect later. It starts immediately. Right away, this person is giving me the legal authority, the right to sit in with them on medical decisions, financial decisions, educational decisions, contract decisions, right? We're working together to do this. And powers of attorney aren't meant to remove the rights from the individual who's signing the power of attorney. It's more meant to build a team around them, folks that they're authorizing to help them be in the room there. Stepping up from there, there's an option in Virginia called limited guardianship. When we talk about going to court for guardianship, usually that means taking control of someone's ability to make all rights and choices. Limited guardianship carves out some of those rights. So you might say, for example, we're going to make all legal and medical and school decisions, but the person still has the right to get a driver's license, assuming they pass the driver's test, to vote, to get married. Those are those that I see preserved most often, but you could really carve it up any way that you wanted. I will say that tends to take a lot of research and advocacy from the family and the person with a disability, because most often when you consider guardianship, what's called full or plenary guardianship is what's proposed. And that's the last rung on this ladder of decision-making support because it's the most heavy-handed. It is Comprehensive, it is permanent unless you go back to court and make adjustments to it. And it is meant to give full control over understanding and making choices to a completely separate individual. So, for example, if someone was a guardian for me, I no longer have the right to give any legal consent to anything in my life. The only person who has that authority would be the guardian. If we walk that ladder on the money management side and sort of get a sense of from least to most restrictive options, I would say some of the least restrictive choices are something like a special needs trust or an ABLE account. That means the person with the disability can save their own money. Family, friends, whoever, legal settlement, Social Security can give them money. And that money is managed in accordance with both benefits law. It's not going to allow someone to lose their benefits. It's meant to protect that eligibility. And it's also designed for a family, for example, if you wanted to leave an inheritance for your child to say, it's fine with me if this money is spent on basic needs and dental care and motorcycles, but absolutely not tattoos, right? It gives you some authority as a parent or as a funder to decide how that money is going to be used. But the person with a disability and anyone else you say has the authority can ask for that money to be used. They can make sure that their needs are met while staying eligible for public benefits. Sort of the next rung up is what's called a representative payee, commonly called rep payees. And rep payees work exclusively with Social Security benefits and income. The job of a representative payee would be to pay someone's monthly and unusual bills that should be covered by Social Security, things like food, rent, utilities, basic needs, which is what Social Security is designed to cover, right? And so oftentimes individuals have a family member or a friend serve as this representative payee, and it just means the bank account said, here's the representative payee. That's why they're the one signing the checks. And that's why they're the one who can log into the account and make sure the balance looks like it should. So for most folks, when we talk about money management, I usually say we've got representative payees for Social Security money. We have special needs trusts and ABLE accounts for any other money the person's going to save or inherit or receive now or in the future. And generally speaking, those two paired together are enough to make sure the person with the disability has protections for their public benefits, protections from abuse, has got the right people helping them out. Sometimes it makes sense to have a financial power of attorney. If someone's regularly going to be making financial decisions with a bank or otherwise beyond what's in that special needs trust or ABLE account and Social Security money, then you may have a power of attorney that says things like, we are joint signatories on this person's checking account, or we can both make deposits and check the balance, right? I'm working with this person on using their financial tools. And then the highest rung on the legal authority ladder on the money side is limited or full conservatorship. It's sort of the guardianship equivalent. It's pretty rare that I see families in the developmental disability realm use this option. It absolutely does involve going to court. It is permanent. The reporting requirements are quite stringent and can be very expensive because a lot of individuals I know who use conservators have to hire accountants to account for literally every penny that person had and used over the course of the year. So both in terms of cost and logistics, if a conservatorship can be avoided, there are all kinds of other tools like those we discussed to protect someone's financial interests and assets, and it usually makes sense to use those. So hopefully this gave us a little bit of a sense of, okay, on both the every other kind of decision side and the money side, there's a range of tools you can use. And you may have a heavier handed tool on one side and a lighter handed tool on the other, kind of depending upon the strengths and needs of the person with a disability. Here, I'm going to take a deeper dive into supported decision making. And we mentioned this as the first option on the make all the life choices side. And like we talked about, it just means getting help to understand and make choices. This is what we all do. I don't know very many adults, if any at all, who do things like buy a house, move, take a job, get a new car without talking to people that they know and trust to get ideas and advice. Maybe you're interested in getting a new car and you talk to other people who've done that recently. You talk to someone in your household who's good with money. You talk to the bank loan manager to figure out how much you would have to pay each month and how that would fit into your budget, right? That's supported decision making. You're getting help to understand and make the choices in front of you. And we all do that all the time, right? In casual conversation. Oh, do you think would I look good as a redhead? Right? These kinds of casual conversations we have with folks when we get their opinions, all the way through really heavy duty things. It can be formal or informal, like we've talked about. So the informal would just be what most of us do. We just ask questions of people we know, love, and trust when it's time for us to make choices. It can be more formalized, meaning we write out in a plan who's going to help us. How are they going to help us? When are they going to help us? What are they going to do to make this work for us so that we're all really, really clear on our roles and we get in a very clear systematic habit of working with whatever our supported decision-making team looks like. And if we've got someone with a developmental disability who's going to need pretty significant ongoing help understanding and making choices, I think writing it out in a plan makes good sense. Right? We all get caught up in our day-to-day lives. We can forget, oh, we had someone to ask about this, or get out of the habit of checking all those boxes every time we go to make a choice. It's a good idea to have it on paper, especially because we as parents aren't going to live forever, right? We want to know that these kinds of things are written down. The whole team is understood and communicating with each other in the event that there's a day when suddenly we're no longer able to be a big part of this supported decision-making group, that someone can pick up a document and keep on running with it. And one of the reasons we talk about supported decision making so much is it changes people's capacity to understand and make choices. So what do I mean by that? And I usually give the example, I manage the money and pay the bills in our household, but if you put me in a room with a total stranger who asked me a bunch of high-level questions for a few hours, and then alone, they said, okay, so draw up a budget and pay every bill for your family, I would say, okay, well, I'm going to need some tools. This isn't exactly how I do this, right? The way that I manage our money and pay our bills are things with Google spreadsheets and calculators that automatically add and tally things for me. We have bills set up on auto pay, so I can't possibly forget to pay them. We have direct deposits. We talked to my dad, who has been on the low end of the income spectrum his whole life and has done a really good job as best he can saving. He's someone's advice I really value. And so when we talk about saving and spending, I go to him. Our office has a 403B retirement fund account manager. Our family has a financial advisor. I talk to all of these people. I use their advice and tools that are tech or not tech to manage all of this money stuff. Those tools and those advisors change my capacity. And so when we talk about someone with a developmental disability being evaluated alone in a room with a psychiatrist or psychologist who may or may not know them well, who says, this person doesn't have the capacity to understand or make financial or medical decisions, it should often say, without support, right? And then the question just becomes, so what's that support? What is the set of tools and helpers we can add to this person's life to elevate their capacity? And I'll give another example. Given the nature of my work, I spend a lot of time talking to candidates, researching minutia of local elections, school boards and county treasurers and state offices, and to some degree federal. And my husband, who I think is a smart person and who does a lot of reading about politics, generally turns to me when it's time for us to fill out our ballots and says, who are we voting for? I don't think that's because he has no capacity, but he relies and trusts on me, who does work and research in this area every day, to support him. That's supported decision making. We wouldn't say, I should have a financial conservator because I can't manage our money without all these tools and helpers. We would say, I do this with these tools and helpers. And we wouldn't say my husband doesn't have the capacity to vote and he shouldn't be voting. We would say, he's going to rely on people he trusts to get their opinion and some facts. He can absolutely do research beyond that. He can talk to multiple folks, but this is how all of us build our capacity. Adulting and life is big, it's complicated. There's more than any one person is going to know and manage all on their own. And for people with developmental disabilities, that just may mean deeper support, more clearly defined support, not a lack of capacity. So when I talk about supported decision making, I just want to really hammer home the point that this is for everyone. If you have no specific disability diagnosis or defined support needs, we're still doing this. We're still asking for people's opinions on things. We're still taking those opinions and ideas and advice into account as we make our decisions. And sometimes that's things like saying, oh my goodness, I'm getting a really scary diagnosis at the doctor's office. I don't want to do this without my spouse in the room, without my adult child, without my best friend. It's overwhelming and scary, and my brain is shutting down because you are telling me big deal things, and I have got to make a lot of heavy handed decisions quickly. I need someone else in here as a sounding board. None of us would say, well, clearly you don't have the capability of making these healthcare decisions on your own. If you've got to have someone else in the room with you helping you understand this, of course we wouldn't. We would say, yeah, maybe sign a HIPAA release and bring them on in, right? We're all using these tools. If someone has a cognitive disability, when they're really having more developmental or brain-based challenges understanding and making decisions than their typical peers, I would say supported decision making is just about the most valuable tool in our toolkit. This helps promote independence. This means this person does still have a say in their life and does have control over their life, but they're getting help to be successful at it. And I think that's what we would want for all of us. And when we see sometimes folks with limited or full guardianships, I would argue by and large, we're still seeing some version of supported decision making at play when those tools are used correctly. A good guardian doesn't say, I'm going to look up a plan for someone of your weight and your age range, and that a nutritionist is published online, and that's all that you're going to eat. That's objectively the best decision. No, of course not. That's wacky, right? A guardian's job is to say, I know what you like to eat. We can talk to your doctor and get some input, but my goodness, we live in a country of people who make questionable eating choices every day. That's okay. If what you really love are donuts and we make a plan to get those every day, every week, whatever that looks like, right? A good guardian, limited or full, is taking into account the preferences, the ability, the experiences, the culture, what we know about that person with a disability, and using that to help them in implementing their choices. We should always be doing this as a team because no one has all the right answers all the time. So, how might this functionally work for someone with a developmental disability, this supported decision-making idea? So we can talk in a second about how to literally write this down on paper, but I would say good supported decision-making plans are going to look at a range of life domains and say, how do we meet the needs the person has in each of these areas? So for example, if we think about finances, we talked about this a little bit in the beginning. Let's say this person has money that grandma already left to them, and a life insurance policy and a home that mom and dad are going to leave to them, and small amounts of money from graduation and from siblings and from whomever, we could say, let's put all of that in a special needs trust. As a team, we're going to sit down and say, this is what we want this money to be used for. We want to make sure it lasts this person's whole life as much as reasonably possible. We want to make sure we're protecting eligibility for benefits. We want to make sure this person's needs are met. And I can tell you the thing that's most important to this person is an annual trip to South Dakota, is a trip to the beach, is a new computer every 2 years, is the latest iPhone, whatever it is. That special needs trust document should define what's important to that person and how you want to make sure that money is managed and spent. And then someone could be that individual's representative payee to help them pay the daily bills with their Social Security money, rent, food, etc., regular monthly fees. And then we're helping that person at all those touch points. Every time a bill's made, we're saying, hey, remember I paid your rent bill today. Remember we've got groceries to budget for this week, those kinds of things. It's an ongoing conversation, but you're just helping the person along. You're outsourcing essentially their financial management. Let's think about that in terms of medical care. I would say a power of attorney is something we see used very often with medical care. And that could say something like, this person and I are a team. If there's an appointment reminder, a test result, a meeting with the doctor, a login to whatever the healthcare site is that y'all use, we need to have access jointly. We're always going to work on this together. I need to be in the room with the person, digital, physical, whatever that looks like, to help them manage and understand this. And as the person gets a new medication, a new diagnosis, that power of attorney can sit with the person and say, okay, we can ask the doctor to explain this in human terms, right? How do we put this in simple terms? Few of us understand all of the complex medical ramifications of decisions we make, but we can ask for that. And you and I together can sit at home. We can look this up online. We can make a social story about it. We can use examples and role playing. We can talk to other people who've had similar needs, right? We can work together to understand and make your medical choices. And that can also look like when we go to the doctor's office, either you're not a highly verbal communicator, you're a very visual person, you really like things to be tangible, we can use a chart of the human body. We can make that our norm at every trip. So as we talk about a new medication, we can talk about the part of the body where we're going to feel it. We can talk about where we'll feel side effects. We can talk about where we're feeling good or where we're hurting, where we want to change things, right? Simple tools like that can make a world of difference. Taking what can be really high level, abstract kind of medical gobbledygook conversation down to a level where the person with a disability really is understanding and included in the process. What about on the education side? This supported decision making is things like saying, can you make sure you send a copy of the previous IEP home? Can I ask for the teachers to suggest some goals in advance and send them home? It helps me to read and digest that before we meet. And after we meet, I don't want to sign that IEP in the meeting. I want to bring it home and talk it over with my family and make sure that it's really everything that I need it to be before I sign it. And I'll bring it back in a day or two. Absolutely. And just like we talked about a medical power of attorney, we could have a special ed power of attorney that says, even though I'm 18, I want my parents to be notified about my meetings, to be able to see progress on my goals, to be able to help sign my IEP with me. We want to keep working as a team, in short, right? And you can do this across every life area. In fact, we have a document at the arcofnova.org/SDM, supported decision making. That's 100 ways to use supported decision making. And the three categories I just talked about are on there, along with housing, relationships, employment, contracts, transportation, all kinds of things. And in each of these categories are at least a dozen ideas about ways you can get help understanding and making relationship choices, right? So for relationships, it can be there's a person I'm comfortable talking to who has had successful relationships, or it can be help me sign up for a developmentally appropriate sex ed class. There are some great folks that do that. Or it can be who's a counselor or a trusted, safe person I can talk through about this. Right? There's a million ways to help people understand and make choices. And we have just 100 of those million down on paper because sometimes it helps us get our brain really in gear, thinking about all the many, many ways we can start layering and wrapping support around someone in various life areas. And then we start to move ourselves pretty quickly away from myself, my loved one, my child can't do this to they could do this if we had these tools and supports in play with them, right? And that's where we want to be headed with supported decision making, to really emphasize the capability of people to really do the best we can to empower them and to make sure that they are maximizing their independence, which for some people is going to look like I do this many things alone. And for some people, it's going to look like I do this many things alone. But for each person, how do we make sure we are taking the gifts and talents and abilities that they have and amplifying them, as opposed to saying, if you can't do this 100% correct 100% of the time, we're taking away all your rights forever, which is a pretty scary position to be in. I think often about how we have 18-year-olds who go out and leave the family nest to go to trade school or work or a college or whatever that looks like. And we expect they are going to make some bad financial decisions. Maybe they're going to rack up debt on that first credit card that's going to haunt them. Maybe they sign for a massive student loan. They have no concept of what it's like to pay that back. They may make some bad relationship decisions, some bad substance use decisions, some bad eating decisions. And we think, that's just life. We all did the same thing. That's how we learned to be responsible about paying bills, only date people who treated us a certain way, be mindful of our health and diet, right? That's how we all learned. And sometimes we don't grant that same grace to people with developmental disabilities. And our zeal to protect people, we say, We better not let them have that chance. We better do everything we can to wrap them in bubble wrap. And in the process, we can end up creating a lot of harm in the short term and the long term. So let's talk about that. The honest reality is there is not a single tool out there that can completely protect someone, right? We see nasty and cruel things happen to kids and adults of all abilities all the time, meaning you don't have to look very far online or in local news to hear those stories, even though about 99.99% of the time, we're all generally doing well. We don't want to let a horror story get us in the mindset that the only thing to do is create the maximum level of protection for someone at all times, because what studies going way back to the 1970s show is it's not guardianship. It's not a piece of paper. It's not an overly protective environment that ultimately keeps someone safe. People are safer when they are empowered, when they believe they have control over their own life, when they know they will be listened to, when they express a concern, when they know that people around them care about them, have their best interests at heart, and are working alongside them to help them reach their dreams, right? That's hugely important. And we can all think about in our own lives the difference between if you said, I no longer trust you to do anything in your life, I'm going to have to sign on that for the rest of your days, versus we can do this together. Don't worry about it. We're going to figure it out. Okay. We'll bring in another expert. We'll build a better team. That's okay. Everyone makes mistakes. We're going to learn from it. We're going to do better the next time, right? One makes us feel defeated and lonely and overwhelmed and scared and incompetent. And the other makes us feel like we are empowered. We are strong. We are smart. We are valued. We have agency in our own life. That self-determination is priceless. I do want to note sometimes we get concerns about what if someone is abused or scammed. Oh my goodness, awful, awful things. We never want those to happen. There isn't a legal tool, a piece of paper that can prevent that, right? We see typically developing adults, very intelligent adults, victims of scams all the time. So then it's what tools do we set in place? Do we put a maximum on credit card withdrawals? Do we say no ATM withdrawals? Do we say withdrawals have to be made with two signatories? Do we say anytime you're going to give money or spend money, first you have to text or talk to so-and-so? What's a system we can set up that supports the person with the disability in having stopgaps before they're taken advantage of without taking away all of the rights and conversations around financial decisions in their life, right? And that's about building a team. So as we think about what does that team look like, first of all, carefully think about all your options, right? We've talked about a big range of choices here today. Everything from all of us in life ask questions of people we love and trust to go to court and we're going to take away all someone's rights. Really carefully think about what you think may work, and starting on the least restrictive side, try it, right? If you have my kids are smaller, they're 6, 10, and 12. Supported decision making is a big part of our lives, right? It's presenting options to them, talking it through in a way that they can understand. For my kids with disabilities, it's lots and lots of examples. We do lots of social stories. We do lots of role play. We do lots of work to help them understand truly the choices that are in front of them. And over time, they have built up a lot of capacity to understand, oh, mom's advice is usually good. Sometimes I'm right and she's wrong. These are things worth accepting. These are risks worth taking or not. So once you sort of get your ideas on paper about how you're going to proceed, either write it down and just start doing it. If it's most of these options, if it's a special needs trust, you're setting that up. If it's a representative payee, you're setting that up. If it's a power of attorney, you're writing that. If it's a supported decision-making plan, you're writing that. Or if you need a court overseen option like guardianship or conservatorship, you're hiring an attorney and moving forward with that. And then over time, all of our capacity changes. Like we've talked about many times today, there aren't any 18-year-olds whose frontal lobes have closed, right? There's no 18-year-old who's completely done with brain development and is at peak decision making. So for all of us over time, especially folks with developmental disabilities, we expect to see an increase in cognitive and processing and decision-making ability. Over time, maybe someone's aging, maybe someone has an injury, maybe someone has a disability that progresses. We may see a decrease in that ability. And so, as folks who love these individuals, our job is over time to say, okay, how do we adjust the plan? We're seeing fewer needs. How do we pull things back? We're seeing greater needs. How do we amp things up? I will note it is much, much, much easier and cheaper to add in more layers of help over time. For example, saying we started with this, then we added in a power of attorney, then we added in a trust, than it is to start full bore with guardianship and conservatorship and peel them back. It is very, very difficult to walk down authority, especially court mandated authority, and expensive to do so. You're paying for more court and lawyer time. So, law and best practices all very clearly say start with the least restrictive option and add more as time goes on based upon what you need. So, how would we really get going with exploring something like supported decision making? Supported decision making is an idea, right? This idea that we're going to get help with things. The supported decision making idea isn't your legal tool. The supported decision making plan is your roadmap to how you are going to figure this out and to determine what tools you need to make it work. There's a mom named Suzanne Francisco who years ago wrote an article called Setting the Wheels in Motion, and it's about her journey as a parent of 3 adults with developmental disabilities who have very different needs and strengths, and determining some version of supported decision making was right for all of them. And she closes with some of the worksheets she created for herself to get ideas on paper. And I really appreciate the parent to parent perspective and the concrete tools that she shares. Other ways, I mean, some folks just sit down with someone they love and trust. That's parents, that's siblings, that's family friends, that's whoever, small or large group, and start talking through it, right? Getting ideas down about here's what's hard for me, here's what's easy, here's where I want help. I personally like a tool a lot from the ACLU called When Do I Want Support? Because I think it's so simple and so clever. It looks at all these different life areas, the same kinds of things we talked about, medical, education, financial, blah, 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 blah. It says in this life area, do I need any help at all? Yes or no? That's a simple one. And it gets us on the same page. And then it moves to, if I do need any help, what does that help look like? Is it a power of attorney so someone can go with me and do these things with me and be notified with me? Is it a special needs trust, a representative payee, a chart of the human body at the doctor's office, preferential seating somewhere? What is it? What's that tool? And then who helps me? And if we're thinking about something in the medical realm, it may be my aunt's a pediatrician and she's going to help me, but it could also be I trust my dad to be at these appointments or my sister. Or here's the nurse practitioner at my doctor's office who's always really patient with me. Here's the best receptionist to ask, right? That team can be small or large. And usually we have a mix of people who are paid, doctors, financial advisors, waiver caregivers, support coordinators, all kinds of folks, and unpaid, usually family and friends, right? And once we get ideas like that on paper, we can see here's where we need help, here's what we need, and here's who's going to do it. You can see where you're strong and where you aren't, right? Maybe we've got good supporters and good team members in one area of life, but not in another. And much like when you first buy a red car and you look around and you think everyone is getting red cars, it's because you've become attuned to it. And so if you look and get these ideas down on paper and realize, the area where we are not strong is relationship advice. My young adult does not like talking to parents, unsurprisingly, about relationship things. We aren't strong here. We are going to what? Start looking for resources. Turn our red car radar on, right? Now that we know that this is what we're thinking about, we're going to start looking for classes, opportunities, peers who are doing this well, trusted voices. And I have yet to meet someone who didn't have a much bigger supported decision-making team already than they thought they would when they sat down to start writing this out, right? Once we start to get those ideas on paper, the folks around the room should be going, oh, and you know who else is good on this? You know who else you usually talk to? You know who else would like to help? We all have a deeper bench than we expect. So, for folks who want to learn a little bit more about this, and before I pivot to questions, I'll say the arcofnova.org/SDM is our whole online supported decision-making library. There's everything that we talked about today and more on there. Supported decision-making videos specific to financial or educational or healthcare decisions, presentations, 1 and 2 page handouts, ways to ask us questions, as well as resources lists like that we're going to look through below. The Disability Law Center of Virginia has free powers of attorney that you can customize. They can help you write advanced directives. Those are the documents, again, that a lot of adults have that say, for example, when would I want life support and how would my end of life care look? They can give lots of information on rights and choices. There's a book that I love called Supported Decision Making, From Justice for Jenny to Justice for All, I think is the subtitle. And it's written by Jonathan Martinez, who's an attorney who worked with us for years on a project around supported decision making, and his then boss, Peter Blanc. And it's written by these attorneys, but I think in very human, family friendly language. It gives really concrete ideas on kinds of things you can put into powers of attorney, talking about how supported decision making came about in the courts in Virginia, data on how supported decision making tends to increase self-determination and safety, all kinds of very interesting things. That Setting the Wheels in Motion article that I mentioned from the mom, Suzanne Francisco, that When Do I Want Support tool from the ACLU is there. And for anyone who has applied for or received a DD, Developmental Disability Medicaid waiver in Virginia, Virginia has a full-time staff person who works for the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services. That's the state agency that oversees DD waivers. And her whole job is work on supported decision making. That's how bought in Virginia and our DD system is on this very long-standing successful concept. And there is a free supported decision-making guide and agreement there. Again, supported decision-making tools are just get it down on paper and figure out if you need additional legal tools to it. So it's not something that's legally binding in and of itself. It's your plan, much like you'd have a service plan or a plan to renovate your house, right? It's getting all those ideas out there. And because it came from the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services, if you go into things like waiver meetings and Medicaid eligibility determinations and things like that, that's a tool that will be understandable and recognized. Not that you can't use other sample plans, but it's a really great way to get all of those ideas out on paper, and it walks you through, again, in each phase of life, who's going to help me? What's that going to look like? How are we going to do this over time? I'm going to take slides down here after. Oh, sorry. I do want to dive quickly into some guardianship and attorney options before I forget. We do have lots of attorneys in the Northern Virginia area if you feel like guardianship is your option. Families usually ask, how do I do that? It's you go hire an attorney. Like if you asked, how do I write a will? Generally speaking, just go hire an attorney to do it for you, and they walk you through it. I would say historically speaking, we heard those costs are $3,000 to $4,000 per filing in Northern Virginia. I think I'm seeing those costs eke up a little bit, more like $4,000 to closer to $5,000 for an average guardianship filing over the course of years with inflation. And it's permanent, of course. So I'm happy to turn off slides here and take any questions that folks have sent in, or feel free to type them in now, and we have plenty of time for those if you have them. It can be a really complicated subject to understand at first, but once you get your mind wrapped around it, it tends to work well. And while I give folks a minute to type or chat in here, I was going to share for about 18 months, we worked really heavy-handedly with 10 people on this idea of supported decision-making, running what was a pilot group, right? And we had a mix of men and women, people between 18 and 40, people with a range of support needs, and lots of people who were non-speaking, and working with how do we help these individuals create a team around supported decision making. And when we began this project, half of them had some form of guardianship in place already, half did not. So the idea was, how do we build towards supported decision making, and how's it going to work for all these individuals, and how does it make us reevaluate the tools we were already using? And I'll say at the end of that year and a half, everyone had solid plans and a team. Everyone used words to describe how the project was like that were things like empowered, excited, optimistic. People were very hopeful for the future. And of the 5 individuals who started without a guardian, they all said, we're sticking on this no guardianship path. This was right for us. Of the 5 individuals who started with a guardian, one said, we're really going to have to keep it, but through the lens of supported decision making. We're no longer just going to sign off on things assuming our adult child doesn't care. We're going to talk through it. And the other 4 all said, in the next 5 years or less, I want to remove this guardianship. Supported decision making is a better tool for us. And so we've seen it do really powerful things. I already have a power of attorney, also medical power of attorney. It sounds like it makes a lot of sense to do supported decision making. Is that right? What a great question. And I would say yes, insofar as what supported decision making means, as I'm saying yes, is writing out a bigger plan. So maybe you've got that power of attorney and that medical power of attorney in place. Great. What about everything else? Relationship advice, navigating a lease, selecting services, transportation. Who helps with all of those other things that aren't necessarily legal decisions, but absolutely areas where we need advice and input and a system for who we're going to talk to and when. And so tools like a supported decision-making agreement or that ACLU document or all kinds of worksheets can help you say, okay, here's my go-to people on this, who I'm going to ask about, who are going to join me when I tour apartments, who are going to help me pick out furniture at the used furniture store, right? Who is it who's going to help with all of these aspects of building my own home? And how do I make sure that they are connected to my greater team? They've got contact information for my case manager who's going to authorize the supports for me to live in that home. And they've got, contact information for my doctor if I fall in my home. All those kinds of things. It's just really powerful to get all that on paper. And I can say as a parent, it offers a lot of peace of mind. You know then that everybody knows who everyone else is in your child's life. They can talk to each other. They can connect with each other. They know how to do this together. It helps make sure you're not losing team members and then that adult child's voice doesn't end up getting bowled over. So yeah, really, really good idea to get that on paper. And then it just feels good. Like having a will or any other plans on paper, you know then that there's something for folks to refer back to that will be respected and observed over time. Do folks have other questions? Okay, well, it can be a really tricky idea. I'll say anytime the arcofnova.org/answers, you can put a question in and all those questions come to me directly. Again, I'm Lucy. So you can reach out to us there anytime. If you're watching this recording on YouTube later, you can go there and ask for a copy of the slides or help finding any of the other resources that we mentioned today or asking any other questions that you have about supported decision-making or related resources. Thank you all so much for being with us here today, and I hope to see you at things in the future and to hear from you about how supported decisions making working for you. Bye-bye.